Hello, welcome to our short recording on the visual pathways and processing influencing motor control. Alright, when we talk about the visual system, we have three pathways that we need to talk about. They all come in via the optic nerve. So that's our first stop, basically, first thing we're going to talk about. If we draw our attention over to the right here, you'll notice that in our schematic of the nervous system I've put a vision box here. That's representing the eyes. This arrow is now representing that optic nerve. The optic nerve comes in, and if we're talking about our visual perception, which is where we now perceive the environment that we are seeing, we know that all sensory information needs to come to the thalamus. In this case, it's the lateral geniculate nucleus of the thalamus, and then we pass that information on. And in the case of vision, we go all the way back to the occipital lobe, to our primary visual cortex. We'll talk a bit about that in a moment. We have the other two pathways, superior colliculus, that controls saccades. Saccades are rapid eye movements. So if, for example, you're sitting there looking at somebody's face that you're having a conversation with, you might think that you're visually fixated on one spot. In reality, every second our eyes shift focus to different locations around that face multiple times a second. So we might look at the eyes, we might look at the mouth, back to the nose, back to the eye, so on. And so that saccadic behaviour allows the visual system to pick up information that we are trying to visually fixate on. Gives us a bit like snapshots of all the details around the place. And then we also have our midbrain pretectal pathway that controls pupillary light reflex. So that's going to be fundamental to controlling how much light is getting into the eye, which is very important because we want to be able to get a nice clear image on the back of the retina, not one that's sort of drained out by a whole heap of light, or not enough. So when we talk about the visual system, what we have is a complex system. When we talk about the retinas with our photoreceptors embedded in them, they're the ones that sense the light, are activated when light hits them. They then pass that information on through some layers, and then basically we create an optic nerve. Those optic nerves then travel to the occipital lobe via the lateral geniculate nucleus of the thalamus. But there's a little twist here in the fact that our retinas one eye doesn't go to one side of the body. What happens is both right sides of the retinas, so both the left eye and the right sides of both eyes, will go to the right side of the brain, so the visual cortex, right visual cortex. The left retinas of both the left and right eye will go to the left visual cortex. So we actually are seeing part of the world in both eyes going to either side. So the right side to the right, left to the left. When we talk about our visual perception, I'm going to elaborate on that in a moment. But before we do that, I'm just going to highlight where these other two pathways are travelling. The saccades, for instance, the blue axon that's coming in here comes all the way in via our optic nerve, comes in and comes to the superior colliculus, which is this knob at the most superior sort of knobby thing at the midbrain, at the dorsum of the midbrain. That structure, the superior colliculus, is actually involved in visual reflexes like actual movement reflexes, and helps to then inform the cortex as well, the frontal eye fields and that kind of stuff, about visual attention and perception. When we talk about our pupillary light reflex, those fibres come in and actually go into a deep structure that's towards the midline of the midbrain, our oculomotor nucleus, and in particular the Edinger-Westphal nucleus of the oculomotor nucleus. that then goes straight back out our ocular motor nerve and goes back out to the eyes and helps to activate our pupillary sphincter muscles to control the amount of light that is getting into the eye. So they're the two blue ones. They're obviously not directly involved in our visual perception, but are fundamental to motor control in the sense that we need clear images with the control of light that's getting in, and we also need to be able to pick up a whole heap of information from the environment around us. So those saccades become very important. Back to our visual perception though. When we talk about visual perception, all that information that's coming from the retinas comes all the way back to our visual cortex, our primary visual cortex, and that's area 17. Okay? That's where we're seeing black and white, greys, general lines and contrast. We're not seeing those clear images that you could imagine when you think about what you see. To get those types of experiences, what we need to do is process that visual information forward through area 18 and 19. And so it radiates out from 17, area 17, and heads through 18 and 19. And different pathways are doing different things, but two major pathways are important, especially for motor control, are the what and where pathway. So the what pathway we call the ventral stream, and it comes down through these inferior portions and down through the inferior portions of our temporal lobe. As it's doing that, it's actually painting in more context and more providing more experience about what it is we are seeing. So it's saying, okay, that's an animal. What kind of animal might that be? Okay, it looks like it might be a dog. It's actually a dog. Yes. No, it's a Labrador. So the further it travels through this what pathway, it's adding in further and further detail. Obviously colour and those sorts of things. And we also have through that pathway the ability to distinguish between what kind of landscapes and whether we're inside and outside and that kind of thing. So that's going to be fundamental, because in motor control we need to have context around what it is that is in our environment that we need to react to and what we don't need to react to. So we need that what pathway to differentiate environmental characteristics. The where pathway comes up through our, it's also known as our dorsal stream, comes up and actually starts to come into our parietal lobe, and it starts to mix in with our somatosensory association cortex. So if you remember, our primary somatosensory cortex here receives the proprioception, touch, pain, sensation coming from the periphery. We then process that information through to our somatosensory association cortex to gain better understanding about those touch proprioceptive happenings of our body. Well, the where pathway then wants to combine that spatial awareness in the movement sense with the visual sense. So we're starting to create a 3D model of where we are in space, analysis of motion and the spatial relationships between ourselves, which are being processed in that parietal area, and now the environment around us. And then we're creating this understanding of how we are moving in space. So that's where then those two, the where and what pathways, will come together, often in our prefrontal areas, where we're making decisions about actions. So that there, in a nutshell, is our visual system in the control of motor actions. And basically we have the visual perception that gives us what we would typically think of as being vision, but there is also saccades and pupillary light reflexes that are also involved and set the foundation for further visual processing. allows us to do some really wonderful complex actions in a motor sense. So thanks for listening, and talk to you soon.